All right. Look, I'm just going to say it. If this episode randomly showed up in your feed, either the algorithm is getting way too comfortable with you, or you've been Googling some very questionable stuff at 3 a.m. No judgment. I've been there. We've all been there. But tonight's topic? This one isn't your typical spooky urban legend or cute little conspiracy theory with a pyramid eye on it. No. This one comes with actual body counts, real arrests, classified investigations, and more red flags than a parade in Beijing. We're diving straight into the joint fever dream of Geishi, Atomwaffen Division, and Tempel of Blood, two groups that make your average neo-Nazi look like he's cosplaying incompetence at a beer festival. These people weren't doing the whole angry guy yelling online thing. They were playing with explosives, building networks across borders, flirting with the idea of mass violence, and, for reasons nobody sane can explain, mixing white supremacist terrorism with occult satanic ritualism, like they were trying to unlock some DLC pack for human evil. And trust me, you're not ready for how deep this rabbit hole goes. And if you're new here, welcome to this mess. I'm Mo. I talk about everything weird and mysterious on this planet. And if this video popped up for you by accident, congratulations, you've officially stepped into the dark tunnel. And trust me, tonight's onion, it's rotten. Like the kind of rotten that has a smell you can't wash off. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, join the family, and let's peel this thing together, layer by disgusting layer. And honestly, all that camera jumping, sound effect spamming, TikTok brain nonsense you see elsewhere, yeah, we don't do that here. We don't flash photos in your face just to boost retention. We don't slap unseen footage on stuff that's literally the first Google image result. And we definitely don't do those jump scare edits that make you drop your phone. It ruins the focus. It ruins the details. It ruins the truth. Here, we keep it raw. Just me, you, and the information. That's it. So if that's your vibe, hit subscribe, grab your coffee, your whiskey, or that neon green energy drink that tastes like melted batteries. Flip your phone sideways, kill the lights, and let's get into it. Because like I always say, even if you think you've heard this story before, trust me, you haven't heard this version. All right, let's start digging. So, Atomwaffen Division, AWD for short. Just hearing the name sounds like something some 15-year-old with a Call of Duty addiction would pick for his clan tag, but the reality, completely different. AWD wasn't playing games. These guys were, and still are, in their various splinter forms. One of the most violent neo-Nazi accelerationist groups to pop up in the US since the 1980s. And if you're wondering what accelerationist means, imagine people so deep into extremism, they believe the best way to fix society is to destroy it completely. Not metaphorically, literally. They want to collapse civilization so they can rebuild it in their apocalyptic racist fantasy. If that sounds like something that should have stayed in a bad dystopian movie from 1992, well, welcome to reality. Now, AWD officially emerged around 2015, founded by Brandon Russell, a Florida National Guard guy who really should never have been allowed near electricity, much less explosives. Public court records from his 2017 arrest, you can look these up, it's all in federal filings, showed that when his roommate was killed, investigators searched their shared apartment and found enough explosive precursors to make Timothy McVeigh raise an eyebrow. By the way, Brandon Russell literally had radiation sources in his garage. Real ones. As in, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had to get involved. So yeah, this wasn't someone LARPing online. But before we go deeper into the operational side, let's talk about the ideology. And this is where things get weird. AWD didn't just rely on the old school World War II era neo-Nazi texts. They were obsessed with a 1992 book called Siege by James Mason. Mason was a neo-Nazi who ended up joining the National Socialist Liberation Front, and his writings, you can still find scans floating around online, basically say, hey, terrorism is the only way forward. Lone wolf attacks, kill systems, start chaos. Great bedtime reading, real inspirational. The important thing, though, is that AWD didn't just treat this book as reading material. They treated it like scripture. Siege became the holy text of the entire accelerationist movement. And this is where you see the roots of the ideology that leads to groups like the Base, Feuerkrieg Division, and all these spin-offs that popped up internationally after AWD officially disbanded in 2020, which, by the way, they only did because law enforcement pressure basically set their house on fire. So, yeah, that's AWD in its early form. Angry white supremacists with explosives, worshipping a book that tells you to destroy society. But then comes the part that even other Nazis looked at and said, wait, what the hell are you guys doing? Enter Tempel of Blood. Toby, a group that is so bizarre and so deeply rooted in extremist occultism that even other Satanists want nothing to do with them. Now, Toby started as an American offshoot of the Order of Nine Angles, O9A. And listen, if you haven't watched my deep dives on O9A, go watch those after this. I already spent hours unpacking their whole philosophy, their rituals, their ties to extremism. You need that context, because Toby, they're like O9A's edgy little cousin that took all the worst ideas and said, not extreme enough, let's crank it higher. Toby mixes apocalyptic accelerationism with this warped interpretation of Satanism that involves ritual violence, glorifying human sacrifice, and a whole bunch of writings that honestly read like someone locked themselves in a basement with too many drugs and a thesaurus. You can trace Toby's ideas back through their published works, especially Liber 333, which was originally released online in the early 2000s. Researchers like Henrik Bogdan and Nicholas Goodrick Clark have written about O9A's influence spreading into extremist corners, and To Be is one of the clearest examples. The group openly promotes infiltrating extremist movements, manipulating them psychologically, and pushing them toward acts of violence. Their own texts say this, not rumored. It's in the PDFs. So, where were we? Right. We've got Atomwaffen Division blowing things up in Florida garages, and Tempel of Blood in some dimly lit basement trying to cosplay as cosmic villains. Two worlds that should never meet, yet somehow they did. Like mixing bleach with ammonia. Nothing good comes out of it except fumes that make everyone dumber and more dangerous. But here's the real question. How did two completely different paths, one political and one occult, twist together like some cursed double helix? To answer that, we gotta jump back to the early 2000s. Picture the internet back then. Forums instead of TikTok. Image boards instead of whatever dystopian app we're all addicted to now. And somewhere in that chaotic stew of angry teenagers and anonymous avatars was a little corner called Iron March. The petri dish, where modern accelerationist extremism incubated like a disease. Iron March wasn't the biggest forum, but it was the right forum. It had this vibe, like everyone inside thought they were the villains of a comic book, and they were totally cool with that. And if you look at the 2019 Iron March database leak, the one activists and journalists dumped on archive.org, you see the usernames posting 2B writings right next to siege chapters. You see people quoting James Mason and then immediately quoting O9A influence material. It's like watching two tumors fuse into one. And buried inside those logs, you start seeing the crossover in action. AWD members, some under their real names, some hiding behind edgy monikers, start talking about insight roles, a concept straight out of O9A. For anyone who skipped my previous 2 deep dives, and you really should watch those, insight roles are basically undercover assignments where members embed themselves into groups, political, religious, extremist, sometimes even military, to manipulate, destabilize, and push them toward violence. Sound familiar? That's because it's the exact behavior investigators later observed in AWD cells. Members were suddenly acting like they were fulfilling missions, like they were trying to level up in some twisted spiritual RPG. One user, and this is in the leaked logs, literally wrote that joining Atomwaffen was part of his sinister initiation. Another bragged about recruiting useful pawns. And look, internet bravado is nothing new. But when those same users were later identified in real-world investigations, and some were arrested for possession of explosives or planning attacks, yeah, suddenly that forum chatter doesn't look like roleplay anymore. Now, one of the strangest things, and this is where I had to step back and rub my temples, is the way Toby wrapped their ideology in this grand cosmic narrative. They claimed humanity is weak. Society needs to collapse. Violence is a purifier. And they believed some sort of transcendent, metaphysical transformation awaited those willing to commit extreme violence. Basically, do atrocities, unlock enlightenment. Real galaxy brain stuff. And what did AWD want? Collapse the system, trigger a race war, accelerate the downfall of society. Do you see the overlap? And here's where the merger happens. Several AWD members were heavily influenced by O9A and To Be writings. Some even talked openly about it on Iron March. Yes, Iron March, the infamous extremist online forum that was leaked back in 2019, exposing usernames, IPs, emails, all of it. Journalists from Bellingcat and others confirmed the connections by analyzing those leaked logs. Inside those logs, you see AWD members discussing O9A philosophy, 2B rituals, and this idea of merging neo-Nazi accelerationism with occult extremism. Like some evil fusion dance. You had guys posting about sinister dialectics, insight roles, and culling straight out of O9A's playbook, while also pushing for race war. Because apparently regular terrorism wasn't enough. They needed aesthetic terrorism. And if at any point you're thinking, wait, how did nobody catch this earlier? Trust me, law enforcement had their eyes on it. But AWD was decentralized. No single leader calling the shots. No hierarchy. Just cells and lone actors. and a bunch of young guys radicalized online who thought they were foot soldiers for some esoteric revolution. Let me ask you, what do you think is more dangerous? A clear organization with a leader, or a scattered network of unstable individuals who think violence is a sacred duty? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this debate, it still matters today. But back to Toby. The thing that really sickened people, even inside extremist communities, was their obsession with violence as transformation. Their whole worldview was centered around the idea that causing suffering purifies the soul, or whatever. It's nonsense, but it's dangerous nonsense because it gives unstable people a framework to justify anything. Investigators later uncovered multiple cases where individuals arrested for AWD-related plots had O9A or to be writings printed out in their rooms. In one case, public court filings, 2018, the Devon Arthurs incident, documents linked Russell and others to literature blending neo-Nazi ideology with occult satanic material. Arthurs himself claimed the group was preparing for acts of violence. Now, yes, Arthurs had major mental health issues, and his statements needed corroboration. But the physical materials, those were real. They were seized. They matched the themes. And that's what makes this rabbit hole so disturbing. You're not just dealing with hateful ideology. You're dealing with a worldview that turns violence into ritual. That turns terrorism into spiritual practice. That turns mass murder into transcendence. It's the type of thing you expect to see in a horror movie, not in a Florida apartment complex, not in a Washington State bunker, not on a Discord server filled with teenagers. By the way, quick side rant. Why does every terrifying thing online always come back to some Discord server with an anime avatar as the admin? Like at this point, if you see a profile picture of a cat girl holding a knife, just assume the FBI is watching. And speaking of that, don't take my word for any of this. This entire rabbit hole has been documented. Researchers like Alexander Reed Ross, counterterrorism analysts from the SACWART Counter-Extremism Project, journalists at ProPublica, Bellingcat, BuzzFeed News. They've all tracked AWD and to be overlaps through leaks, arrests, and interviews. The information is public, verifiable, traceable. No mystery there. But the deeper mystery, the one nobody's fully answered yet, is how these two ideologies fuse so smoothly. How a racist, accelerationist terror network got tangled up with a fringe occult movement that believed in human sacrifice. How those threads pulled in dozens of young people who thought they were joining something powerful. And that is where we're heading. But before we go further, look, I want to hear from you. Does this kind of ideological mashup surprise you? Or do you think the internet just naturally funnels angry, lost people into whatever extreme happens to be trending that year? Drop your thoughts. I'm genuinely curious. Two groups with different aesthetics. One Nazi, one occult, but with a shared destination, apocalypse. And every time you get groups like this smelling apocalypse, bad things happen. Look at Aum Shinrikyo in Japan in the 90s. Look at the Rajneesh bioterror attack in Oregon. You mix esoteric ideology with extremist politics, and you get a Molotov cocktail with a God complex. But here's the thing that people still don't fully understand. AWD wasn't just getting weird ideas from Toby. They were getting a framework, a psychological structure. a ritualistic narrative that made violence feel meaningful. And when you make violence feel meaningful, you create zealots. You know how cults work. They always give you a grand mission, something that makes you feel bigger than your ordinary life, something that tells you your suffering, your loneliness, your anger, your confusion. All of that is part of a cosmic story. Toby capitalized on that perfectly. They position themselves as this elite, ultra-secret, ultra-powerful satanic order. Even though, realistically, we're talking about a handful of individuals writing edgy PDFs in the dark. But the idea of it was magnetic. And AWD members looking for meaning, especially the younger ones, often isolated, often disillusioned, ate that narrative up. It's easy to say, oh, these guys were just evil. But no extremist is born fully formed. They get pulled in through identity crises, loneliness, anger. And Toby gave them a story where their rage was a weapon and their existence mattered. If that doesn't scare you, it should. Because when you mix radical politics with spiritual purpose, you stop being a guy with a manifesto and become a guy on a mission. And people on missions don't hesitate. This is why you see so many AWD-affiliated plots between 2017 and 2020. Cases documented in federal indictments, FBI statements, DOJ press releases. You had AWD members arrested for planning attacks on power grids, synagogues, nuclear facilities. You had real weapons caches, not hypotheticals, not rumors, stuff on camera, stuff photographed by law enforcement. There's too many cases to list here, but look up the 2020 arrest of the AWD members who targeted power stations in Colorado and Georgia, or the documented plot from 2019 involving a self-proclaimed AWD supporter in Las Vegas caught with bomb-making manuals, or the Canadian cases involving Feuerkrieg Division, another O9A influenced accelerationist group, where underage members were exchanging 2B texts. It's a pattern, not a coincidence. But here's the part that still gives me chills. Law enforcement and researchers noticed that after 2018, the rhetoric in AWD chats started shifting. It wasn't just race war anymore. It was destiny, fate, spiritual transformation, wrapping violence in metaphysics. That language? That's not Mason. That's not Siege. That's O9A. That's to be. And if you think I'm exaggerating, go read the academic analysis by Dr. Jason Coney, or the writings published by the Extremism Project. They literally break down the infiltration process, step by step. One analysis even points out how several AWD members began using terms like aeonic, sinister, culling, and Nexian, all O9A vocabulary. All right, you're still here. That means either you're actually invested in this investigation, or you're currently sitting in the dark with a half-finished drink thinking, what the hell did I just click on? Either way, welcome back. So, earlier, I threw a question at you. Whether these groups actually believed their occult ideology, or whether the occultism was more like a psychological weapon. And I swear, every time I go through the research, the court filings, the academic papers, the interviews, the leaked chats, my answer changes. Not because the evidence changes, but because the people inside these groups were so different from one another. You had true believers. You had manipulators. You had confused, angry guys who didn't understand half the stuff they were reading, but thought it sounded powerful. And then you had the Toby writers, Who? Oh boy, we'll get to them. But let's start by peeling that layer of the onion. When you dig into Toby's material, Liber 333, Iron Gates, their commentaries on O9A doctrine, you start to see a pattern. The language is intentionally cryptic, half philosophical, half edgy, half, honestly, half nonsense. It's almost written to create the illusion of depth. It's the same trick a lot of cults use. Make the text confusing enough that the reader assumes they are the problem, not the text. Anyone who's ever read Aleister Crowley knows the playbook. Mix metaphor with doctrine, sprinkle in pseudo-mysticism, and boom, instant cult credibility. 2B did that, but darker, much darker. They glorified violence openly. They presented culling, code for murder, as a sacred act. They wrote about infiltrating extremist or political groups as a form of ritual initiation. And they packaged everything in this dramatic, we're the enlightened elite tone that, and this is the important part, appeals to people who feel powerless. If you ever wonder how the worst extremist groups pull people in, this is how. Not through logic, not through political arguments, through emotional appeal, through identity, through making someone feel like they finally belong to something bigger. This is where AWD and To Be intersect perfectly. AWD members were young. Research from ProPublica and the SPLC found many were teenagers or early 20s. They were online, angry, isolated, and craving identity. And here comes Toby, whispering about transcendence, whispering that pain is a path to power, that society is weak, that the world must be destroyed to be reborn. It gave them a mythology to wrap around their hate. That's not casual influence. That's ideological infection. Isn't it wild how every dangerous movement always thinks they're special? Like they've cracked the code of the universe? Every extremist ideology ever is basically the same 3 sentences in a trench coat. 1. The world is broken. 2. Only we know how to fix it. 3. Fixing it requires horrific violence. That's it. That's the whole blueprint. Whether you paint it Nazi beige or occult blood red, it's the same pattern, just dressed differently. But let's get back on track, because the timeline is important here. Around 2017 to 2018, AWD members start pushing deeper into occult material. Some branches become more extreme. Some start referencing Toby operations. Again, language right out of those PDFs. Meanwhile, Toby begins inserting itself into political spaces, something O9A practitioners have openly advocated since the 1990s. You have overlapping membership, overlapping doctrine, overlapping goals. Researchers have even noted specific individuals who were members of both groups, though I'm not naming them here for safety reasons. But the documentation exists, public sources exist, and journalists have covered it extensively. And this is where AWD begins rattling apart. Because internally, the group had fractures. Some members were horrified by the occult stuff. Others embraced it. Some wanted pure political accelerationism. Others wanted ritual violence. And all of this is happening while the FBI is kicking down doors and dragging half their leadership to court. So AWD starts splintering, breaking into factions. Some rebrand. Some go deeper underground. Some move into Europe. Some merge with or influence new groups like National Socialist Order, Feuerkrieg Division, and Sonnenkrieg Division, the latter two of which the UK later designated as terrorist organizations. But Toby didn't break. They stayed small, secretive, and decentralized, exactly how they wanted it. They weren't interested in banners or marches or recruits. They wanted infiltration. They wanted influence. And when AWD started bleeding members, guess who collected the ideological leftovers? Now, at this point, you might expect me to say something like, and that's the end of it. But no. Because even though AWD officially dissolved in March 2020, right after several members were arrested in Virginia, the ideology didn't dissolve. Accelerationist extremism didn't dissolve. Toby didn't dissolve. O9A didn't dissolve. And we know that because I already spent 2 entire videos exposing their operations. If anything, the rabbit hole just kept going, and it still hasn't hit bottom. Now, I want to ask you something, and answer honestly in the comments. Do you think these groups genuinely believe their own occult ideology? Or was it just another tool to manipulate unstable people into violence? Because depending on the answer, the next section gets a lot scarier. And for a certain type of person, that mix hits like gasoline on a spark. But here's the twist. And this is where the story takes a weird, ugly turn. Not everyone in AWD bought into the occult stuff. Some hated it. Some mocked it. Some thought it made the movement look ridiculous. There were actual arguments inside the group about this. Arguments documented in chat leaks and reported by journalists who interviewed former members. One AWD member in a chat log from 2018 called the 2B material LARP garbage. Another said the occultists were ruining the mission. Another accused certain AWD leaders of being manipulated by satanic weirdos. Internal fighting, divisions, fractures. It's almost funny, if it wasn't so dangerous. A terrorist group arguing about whether their members are too into Satanism. And yet, the influence kept spreading. Because for every member rolling their eyes, there was another one diving deeper. The FBI noted in later indictments that several AWD members possessed O9A influence books during arrests. TOB, through their writings, was encouraging infiltration. Infiltration was happening. In the more extreme branch inside AWD, the ones who wanted total societal collapse saw Toby's ideology as a kind of accelerant. Toby offered them justification. O9A offered them ritual. Siege offered them a blueprint. Now imagine you're a young, unstable guy in your late teens. You're angry at the world. You feel powerless. You feel small. And suddenly, these ideologies are merging, telling you, you can be powerful. You can transform the world. You can become something beyond human. All you have to do is destroy. That's a dangerous cocktail, and this is where we meet the part of the story that doesn't get talked about enough. The fictionalization strategy. Here's something wild. Some TOB texts appear to deliberately blur the line between fiction and doctrine. Iron Gates, one of their infamous novels, is written like a dystopian nightmare full of ultraviolence and apocalyptic imagery. Some researchers argue the book is meant to be metaphorical. Others argue it's meant to incite people. Others say it's an initiation tool. But when AWD-affiliated individuals were arrested between 2017 and 2020, and investigators found copies of Iron Gates printed out beside siege and bomb-making instructions. I mean, At that point, does it matter whether Toby meant it as fiction? If someone is unstable enough, they're going to treat it as scripture. This tactic, hiding ideology inside fiction, is seen in other extremist movements too. Sometimes they call it esoteric coding. Sometimes it's just plausible deniability. But in Toby's case, there are too many overlaps with their non-fiction writings for it to be accidental. And the more I dug into academic research on this, people like Professor Monica Hoffman, Jacob C. Williams, and the counter-terrorism policing reports in the UK, the more it became clear this was intentional. Toby framed violence as both artistic and spiritual. They fetishized brutality. They made suffering a sacrament. Which brings us back to the question, who actually believed it? And the answer is complicated. Some Toby authors? Probably not. The writing style suggests manipulation more than faith. Some O9A practitioners? Yes, absolutely. The ideology goes back to the 1970s, and there are documented cases of real-world violence connected to it. Some AWD members? Yes. Evidence shows multiple adopted the occult language and practices. But the real danger isn't belief. It's utility. Occult ideology gave AWD what Siege alone couldn't, a sense of cosmic significance. If you're a young extremist, and you believe you're not just fighting a political battle, but a spiritual war, suddenly every act of violence becomes meaningful, symbolic, sacred. And that is exactly how extremist groups turn into cults. Let me give you a real example. In multiple cases, documented in arrest reports and interviews, AWD members carved or drew O9A or to B symbols on notebooks, on walls, on rifles. There are court exhibits showing this. Some even performed rituals, or tried to, based on TOB instructions. Think about that. Not just racism, not just political extremism, ritual. Whenever ideology becomes ritual, it gets sticky. It gets into the bloodstream. It stops being about logic and starts being about identity. And this is one of the reasons law enforcement had such a hard time tracking the group's evolution. Because when you take an already decentralized terror network and then add occult ideas that encourage secrecy, infiltration, and violence, you get something harder to identify, harder to track, harder to infiltrate. That's what makes this rabbit hole so terrifying. It's not the scale of the network, it's the chaos of it. Now let me take a quick detour, because I want to highlight something that too many people forget. AWD didn't start a cult. Toby didn't start political. These things merged over time. The overlap wasn't planned. It emerged organically through the internet, through shared spaces, shared grievances, shared fantasies. It's like mold growing where the light doesn't reach. And the more you expose yourself to these ideologies, the more you lurk on forums that reinforce your isolation and anger, the more the worldview starts to feel inevitable. People always ask, how does someone fall this deep? And the answer is boring, painfully boring. Isolation, mixed with ideology, mixed with community, mixed with reinforcement. Nobody signs up day one saying, hey, I want to join an extremist occult terror network. It happens inch by inch, post by post, DM by DM, PDF by PDF. And TOB knew that, and AWD capitalized on that, and O9A encouraged that. This is why the connections matter. This is why researchers track terminology in chat logs. This is why journalists follow leaked IPs across continents. This is why investigators pay attention when a 17-year-old in Estonia starts quoting a niche occult ideology from the 1980s. It's not random. It's not a meme. It's radicalization. And now, with AWD splintered and to be still operating in the shadows, here's the big question that haunts the whole rabbit hole. Are these ideologies still spreading? Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes. And the internet made it 10 times easier. But we'll get into the current landscape in the next part, because that's where things get even darker. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think groups like Toby are dangerous because of their ideology itself, or because they provide a narrative that unstable people latch onto? I want to hear your take. So let's peel this thing further. And honestly, at this point, this onion doesn't even make you cry anymore. It just burns, like battery acid. But here we go. Because when we talk about whether these ideologies are still spreading, you can't just look at AWD itself or to be itself. A lot of people think these groups died because the FBI cracked down, or because some members got arrested, flipped, disappeared, or whatever. But that's not how extremist ideology works. It doesn't die. It just molts. It sheds one skin and slides into another body. And right now, the internet is one giant, warm, cozy terrarium for these people. And I want you to picture this. Back in the early 2000s, if you wanted to get into this stuff, you had to dig through forums, paste bin dumps, weirdo PDFs, Forshawn archives, encrypted chats. It was a whole scavenger hunt. Now, a motivated kid with a cracked phone screen and a Wi-Fi password his neighbor forgot to change can find accelerationist propaganda in about 3 clicks. Not because anyone is openly posting how to join Tube. No, it's worse. It's subtle. It's aesthetic. It's packaged. It's gamified. One researcher from the UK's Hope Not Hate actually pointed this out back in 2020 when they were tracking O9A spread. Ideology today travels like a meme packet. There's no need for a group to physically exist in one place anymore. The group becomes the content. It becomes the vibe. And that is horrifyingly efficient. Accelerationism, the brand AWD pushed, got turned into a whole subculture online. They mix the esoteric with the edgy, slap some VHS filter over a Nazi quote, and suddenly it's aesthetic. It's like weaponized Tumblr, but if Tumblr was run by the worst possible people alive. And this is why crackdowns don't really eliminate these networks. They just scatter. They become decentralized. They become harder to track. And Toby? Oh, Toby went even more abstract. They leaned into the whole occult mystique thing, which is honestly one of the most manipulative rebranding tricks extremists ever used. Because the moment you add cryptic rituals and secret knowledge to anything, you attract 2 kinds of people. 1, the ones who want to feel special. 2, the ones who want to feel feared. You don't need a headquarters when the ideology itself becomes the initiation. And here's where it gets real uncomfortable. A lot of AWD members blurred into O9A stuff. A lot of O9A sympathizers blurred into to be. And then those blurred lines inspired a new wave of copycats, microgroups, or lone individuals who only exist online, but still absorb all the worst parts. Let me give you an example, because it shows the pattern perfectly. After AWD supposedly disbanded in 2020, which, by the way, the Department of Justice never bought for a second, you started seeing splinter groups pop up with names like Feuerkrieg Division in Europe, Sonnenkrieg, and a bunch of other divisions that are basically bootleg Atomwaffen clones. Law enforcement in multiple countries, from Estonia to the UK, had to deal with teenagers, literal kids, who were adopting the exact same aesthetic. Skull masks, black and white propaganda posters, accelerationist slogans, the whole package. And when investigators traced where they were getting this stuff from, Telegram, Discord, encrypted servers, image boards, some of the content was straight up traced back to O9A material, including the 2B texts. Remember Liber 333, the one Toby circulated? Investigators like the team at Bellingcat found fragments of that same text embedded in propaganda from groups that had never even existed when Toby first showed up. That means the ideology is no longer about membership. It's about infection. And I want you to sit with that for a second. You can dismantle a group. You can arrest the leaders. You can shut down the Telegram channels. But if the ideology becomes modular, if it becomes something that random isolated people can download like a plugin, then you're not fighting a group anymore. You're fighting a format. So when people ask, are these groups still active? The better question is, do they even need to be active to keep spreading? And here's where we talk about the present, like 2023, 2024, right now present. Most of the activity tied to AWD these days is individual actors absorbing their material and then spiraling into self-radicalization. You know how the FBI described AWD's worldview? They called it leaderless resistance, meaning the perfect version of the movement is one where no one is controlling anything. The ideology itself drives the behavior. The movement wants to be untraceable. They want to be decentralized. They want to be viral. And guess what the internet does better than anything else? Exactly. But here's the kicker, and it's something most people don't realize. A lot of the modern spread of this stuff doesn't happen on dark web forums or some scary Hollywood hacker basement. Nope. It happens in gaming communities, anime servers, ironically, edgy meme pages, places where the algorithm has no idea that the jokes being posted are actually recruitment content layered under layers of humor. There was a study in 2021 by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, you can look it up, documenting the way extremist content was being disguised inside video game screenshots, fan edits, and out-of-context quotes. It wasn't just Nazi memes. It was AWD and Toby concepts being threaded into weird esoteric joke posts, almost like hiding a razor blade inside cotton candy. And that's what makes the modern landscape so dangerous. The pipeline is casual. Someone sees an accelerationist meme, laughs, thinks it's edgy, finds the source, gets curious, downloads the PDFs, falls into the ideology, convinces themselves they're part of something elite or forbidden. And if they're already dealing with rage, loneliness, or instability, these ideologies give them a storyline. That's the part nobody wants to talk about, the psychological piece. Because the real recruitment tool isn't the ideology, it's the identity. It gives to people who feel like they have none. You want to know why Toby's occult angle works? Because it makes people feel like they're accessing a secret universe. You want to know why AWD's accelerationist angle works? Because it gives hopeless people a way to turn their hopelessness into something meaningful. And this is going to sound harsh, but it's true. Most people who fall into these groups are not masterminds. They're not philosophers. They're not dark magicians plotting in a basement. They're lonely. They're angry. They want significance. And extremism, especially occult-branded extremism, sells significance like it's candy. And that's why, right now, in 2025, the ideology is still spreading. Not in big public clusters, but in micro pockets of the internet, where no adult supervision exists. You know how some parents in the 90s were scared their kids would fall into Satanism because of metal music? If only they knew how sanitized those fears were compared to what's happening today. Because today, the real danger isn't a band. It's a PDF. It's a meme. It's a Telegram channel run by someone who has never shown their face. And when authorities try to track the ideology, it slips through. Because there is no group to track anymore. Just a network of nodes, individual users carrying fragments of doctrine, repeating them, remixing them, injecting them into new communities. It's like ideological dust in the air. You don't see it, but you breathe it in. And I'm going to be real with you. Some of the most dangerous cases in the last couple years weren't caused by anyone recruited into a group. They were people who radicalized alone through content and then acted on it. Which brings us to the uncomfortable truth. These ideologies are alive, not because the groups are alive, but because the internet keeps them immortal. And before we go deeper, yeah, you know I'm about to ask this. Tell me in the comments, do you think the internet is making extremism stronger? Or do you think it's just exposing something that was already here all along? Because we're about to get into the modern ecosystem. Who's spreading what, how it mutates, and how groups like Toby manage to maintain influence without even needing to exist physically. Okay, and this is where things really start bending in on themselves. Because once you understand how these ideologies survive, the next question becomes, who's actually keeping them alive today? And spoiler, it's not who people think. See, a lot of folks imagine some shadowy headquarters somewhere, a candlelit basement full of skulls, 18 hooded members chanting in a circle, maybe someone slicing their palm open for theatrics. Because that's the Hollywood idea of extremist occult groups. Physical, dramatic, ritualistic. But the actual modern landscape, way less dramatic, way more creepy. The truth is, the ideology survives through micro-influencers. And I don't mean influencers, like YouTubers with ring lights. I mean anonymous accounts with usernames like void_seeker_777 and chaos_saint. Accounts that pretend to know secrets they absolutely do not know. Accounts that play the role of mystic mentor, even though they're probably just some dude who works at a vape shop and eats Hot Pockets for dinner. This is the new pipeline. You don't join a group. You follow a personality, a vibe, a mythos. And that mythos gets pieced together from old AWD propaganda, leftover O9A writings, to B's violent esoteric aesthetic and modern doom culture. It's basically a smoothie made from every rotten ideology on the internet. And once it's blended, good luck figuring out where one influence ends and another begins. And hey, you've seen me break down O9A in those 2 deep dives already, so you know exactly how slippery this ecosystem is. The symbolism overlaps. The messaging overlaps. The philosophy mutates. It's like ideological crossbreeding. A hydra with new heads growing faster than anyone can cut them off. And here's something that researchers have been yelling about for years, but nobody wants to hear because it's terrifyingly simple. Extremism today spreads like fandom culture. Yeah, fandom. People don't just follow an ideology. They join a community. They make edits, inside jokes, memes. They remix 2B's cryptic language with anime quotes. They slap AWD aesthetics onto synthwave art. They turn Accelerationism into an aesthetic playlist on Spotify. I'm not kidding. Look it up. There are playlists with titles like Collapse Core floating around, full of people who have no idea where half those symbols come from. Because that's what's happening. The ideology is slipping into the culture as imagery. Symbols always outlive movements. It's easier to spread a picture than a manifesto. And the modern internet thrives on pictures. Now, let's talk about the actual landscape. The terrain these groups and their offshoots are spreading across today. Not the past. Not the documented history. I'm talking about the right now. First, Telegram. It's still the main hub. Private channels, forwarding networks, study groups that pretend they're doing philosophy but are absolutely not doing philosophy. Telegram is like the Wild West of ideology diffusion. The platform doesn't enforce much unless it's blatantly illegal. And even then, people just remake channels. It's whack-a-mole, but the moles have VPNs. Second, Discord. You wouldn't believe how many extremist pipelines start as gaming servers. Someone joins for Minecraft or Rust or whatever, and then a mod drops edgy memes that are not actually memes. This is a real pattern researchers have been tracking, the ironic gateway. Because irony becomes normalization. Normalization becomes validation. Validation becomes recruitment. Third, obscure forums and image boards. Not even the big ones everyone knows. I'm talking about the splinter boards, the copycat boards, the spin-off sites made by 4 guys who got banned from the main one. These places become ideological petri dishes because nobody moderates anything. It's the digital equivalent of leaving raw meat out in the sun. Bacteria paradise. Fourth, private PDFs. This is the part that scares me the most, honestly. Someone rips an extremist book, edits it, adds commentary, layers fake mysticism inside it, and then uploads it into a Google Drive folder labeled something like occult research. And impressionable people eat it up like it's encrypted sacred knowledge from Mount Doom. Fifth, AI-generated propaganda. Yeah, welcome to 2025. We're here now. You've got bots making stylized extremist posters because someone typed in a prompt like grim, apocalyptic, accelerationist aesthetic into an AI. And the AI doesn't know the historical weight of the symbols it's using. It just spits them out. So now, extremist imagery circulates at massive scale without a human even needing to design it. And people wonder why the ideology keeps spreading. But here's the real twist. And this is something law enforcement, researchers, and former members all say the same thing about. Most of the people spreading this ideology today don't fully understand it. They're parroting fragments, pieces taken out of context, slivers of Toby rituals, scraps of O9A philosophy, cherry-picked AWD slogans, and edgy quotes from Nietzsche they definitely didn't read in the original text. It's like watching someone try to assemble a bomb using IKEA instructions written in Sanskrit. They know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to know what they're doing. And that ignorance, that's exactly why it spreads so easily. When you don't understand something, you fill in the gaps with imagination. And people love imagining themselves as dark, edgy, powerful, rebellious. And this is where we get into the uncomfortable honesty. The ideology is more dangerous when it's misunderstood, because then it becomes projection, and projection becomes obsession, and obsession becomes action. And when that happens, you get lone actors, unpredictable, uncontrolled, untethered to any hierarchy. You know how intelligence agencies describe these individuals now. They call them self-assembled extremists, meaning they built their ideology like a DIY kit from different corners of the internet. And this brings us to the final question, the one I want you to seriously think about, because it's not just about AWD or TOB or O9A or any of the groups we've fallen into through this tunnel. The real question is, what happens when extremism no longer requires a group at all? Because that's where we are. Ideology without structure, ritual without community, violence without command, radicalization without recruitment. And when ideas float freely like that, when they're no longer tied to one organization, one leader, one doctrine, they become almost impossible to kill. You can't raid a Telegram channel that doesn't exist anymore. You can't arrest a decentralized meme. You can't dismantle an ideology that's been chopped into 1,000 aesthetic pieces and scattered across every corner of the internet. And if I'm being real with you, and you know I always am, this might be the future of extremist movements in general. Not groups, not cults, not militias, just loose networks of meaning-starved people connecting through edgy symbols, occult aesthetics, and apocalyptic fantasies. You remove one symbol, another takes its place. You shut down one channel, 3 more appear. You ban a PDF, someone re-uploads it under a different title. It's the Hydra effect. Cut off a head, 7 grow back. And look, I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this because this is the reality of how ideology mutates in the digital age. And understanding that mutation is the only way to understand how groups like Atomwaffen Division or Tempel of Blood keep their influence long after the world believes they've died. All right, before we wrap this up, I always want to hear from you. Do you think decentralized ideology is more dangerous than organized groups? Or does the lack of structure weaken the movement over time? Tell me below, because this conversation is far from over. And if you made it through this whole rabbit hole, you already know what to do. Hit that subscribe, join the family, and let's keep digging through the dark together. Because trust me, the next tunnel is even worse.